The evening was supposed to be uneventful. A casual Sunday dinner at my parents' vacation home in Bear Lake, just like we'd done dozens of times before. The fire crackled in the oversized stone hearth, the scent of rosemary and roasted potatoes lingering in the air. My mother sat quietly on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while my father paced near the dining table, his face flushed with frustration. I had barely put my coat down before he launched into it. "How could you be so selfish?" he demanded, his voice reverberating off the wooden beams above. "Your sister needs that money for her new business venture. You have more than enough." I blinked, caught off guard, my grip tightening around the envelope I had been handed moments earlier. I hadn't even sat down yet, and I was already being interrogated. My heart pounded as I glanced down at the familiar white paper, my parents' property tax bill. For 5 years, I had been the one paying it without question, just like I had been covering Megan's car payments, my mother's uncovered medical expenses, and the countless family vacations my father insisted were gifts to everyone. And yet, standing in front of me, my father spoke as though I owed them more. I inhaled sharply, steadying myself. "Dad, I've been paying for everything for years," I said, forcing my voice to remain even. "The property taxes, Megan's business trips, Mom's medical bills. We gave you everything growing up," my father interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "And now that we need you, you're abandoning us while your sister is trying to make something of herself." I clenched my jaw. I had worked for everything I had. No handouts, no shortcuts. Every dollar in my account was the result of sleepless nights, analyzing market trends, calculating risks, and surviving the financial roller coaster of day trading. Meanwhile, my sister had been coddled from the moment she could walk, shielded from consequences and responsibility. And yet, I was the selfish one. A flicker of movement caught my eye. A document peeking out from under a magazine on the coffee table. The bold black lettering caught my attention. Trust Fund, Megan Walsh. Something cold and sharp twisted in my stomach. I reached for the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled it free. My father stiffened. "Louise, that's private." But it was too late. My eyes scanned the text, my breath coming in shallow bursts as the words sank in. $350,000. Set aside exclusively for Megan. Additional provisions for future contributions. Money that had existed for years, accumulating in silence while I had been told time and time again that there wasn't enough for me. My hands tightened around the paper. "When were you going to tell me about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father exhaled sharply, yanking the document from my grip. "You weren't supposed to see that," he muttered, folding the paper as if that would somehow erase the truth from existence. Clearly, I felt the blood drain from my face. The favoritism, the years of excuses, the unspoken expectation that I was their safety net while Megan was their investment, it all crystallized in an instant. I had spent my entire life justifying their decisions, convincing myself that things had just worked out differently for me. That maybe financial struggles had been worse when I was younger. That maybe they had learned from their mistakes by the time Megan needed help. But no, the money had always been there. It had just never been for me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I guess that explains why you never helped with my student loans," I said coldly. My father shifted uncomfortably. "Investment decisions aren't that simple, Louise. We had to think about the future." "Just not my future," I said, the words like ice on my tongue. I thought back to the nights I had worked 2 jobs just to scrape together rent, to the time I had broken down in tears after my car stalled on the freeway because I couldn't afford the repairs, to the countless times I had swallowed my pride and asked for help, only to be met with carefully measured regret. "We're so proud of you," my mother spoke at last, her voice soft, placating. "You've always been so independent, so capable. Your sister needs more help than you do." The logic was so twisted, so absurd that I almost laughed. I had been punished for my success, while Megan had been rewarded for her dependence. They hadn't just expected me to support them, they had counted on it. And now that I was hesitating, they were outraged. I stared down at the tax bill still resting on the table. $8,700, due next month. My father slid it toward me, the weight of his expectations heavier than ever. The Homeowners Association increased their fees again. He added as though that were my problem to solve. Something inside me shifted. A fundamental, irreversible recalibration. "I'll take care of it," I said quietly, picking up the bill. My father exhaled, relieved. But he didn't see it, didn't hear the finality in my voice. Because this was the last check he'd ever get from me. The drive back to my apartment in downtown Salt Lake City was a blur. The snow-capped mountains that usually brought me peace seemed distant, hollow, mocking. I had spent years believing that my sacrifices had meant something, that my financial contributions were a sign of gratitude, of duty. Now, I saw them for what they truly were: exploitation, masked as family responsibility. The trust fund document burned in my memory. $350,000. A safety net Megan never had to ask for. Well, I had been told there simply wasn't enough to help me. And yet, when the property taxes came due, when a vacation needed funding, when Megan's car payments mysteriously fell behind, it had been me they turned to. Every single time. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from my father. "We're counting on you for those taxes. Don't let us down." I let out a short, humorless laugh. No acknowledgement of what I had uncovered. No attempt to justify it. Just the expectation that I would continue playing my part. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Not this time. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were trembling not from anger, but from something colder: clarity. Years of manipulation, dismissed as love, were unraveling before me. I had been conditioned to believe that family meant sacrifice, that love was measured in dollar signs and unspoken obligations. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger would come later. Right now, all I felt was tired. I moved on autopilot, kicking off my shoes and heading straight for my desk. My laptop hummed to life, and with a few keystrokes, I pulled up the folder I had kept for years but never thought I'd need. Financial contributions. Family A spreadsheet appeared on my screen, meticulously organized. Every payment, every transfer, every expense dated, categorized, accounted for. I scrolled through the numbers, my stomach twisting as the total climbed higher and higher. 5 years of property tax payments, $43,500 Megan's car payments, $11,068 vacation home roof repairs, $122. Oh, mom's medical expenses uncovered by insurance, $8,200, family vacations I had gifted, $22, $400. Total, $118,745. Almost $120,000. Money that had been willingly given, but under a false pretense. I had assumed we were all struggling together. I had believed I was helping keep us afloat. But the truth was, I had been their financial safety net while they secretly built one for Megan. My fingers tightened on the edge of the desk as a wave of nausea rolled through me. It wasn't just the money. It was the lies, the manipulation, the ease with which they had expected me to continue supporting them. As if on cue, another text popped up, this time from Megan. "Dad says you're being difficult about the taxes. Don't be selfish, Louise," one exhaled sharply, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. Selfish. They had drained me for years. And now, the moment I hesitated, I was selfish? Something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just seeing the pattern, I was breaking it. I picked up my phone, fingers steady as I typed my reply. "I'm done." I hit send before I could second guess myself, then silenced my phone. Let them wonder. Let them panic. Tomorrow, I would call my financial advisor. I would withdraw myself from every family expense, cancel the automatic payments, and move every remaining cent I had willingly handed over into an account, under one name, only mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't giving. I was taking back. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The weight that had pressed against my chest for so long, the endless burden of obligation, of expectation, was suddenly lighter. Today, I wasn't going to be the family's safety net. Today, I was cutting myself free. I sat at my desk, my laptop open, my fingers steady as I logged into my accounts. I had spent too many years moving money around to cover their debts. Too many late nights checking balances to make sure their bills were paid while I quietly sacrificed my own goals. Not anymore. The first step was simple: cancel every automatic payment. The property tax auto debit, disabled. Megan's car payments, removed from my account. The utilities, the HOA fees, the emergency fund I had set up just in case they needed it, gone. Every click of the mouse felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a final severing of the invisible chains they had wrapped around me for years. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to check to know who it was. The barrage of texts had started before dawn, first from my father, then Megan, then my mother. I let them pile up, unread. Let them simmer. By noon, my father had escalated. Call me, now. Louise, I'm warning you. Don't do anything rash. This is family. You don't just walk away from family. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Funny how they never sent messages like this when I was wiring money to cover their costs, when I was quietly shouldering their responsibilities, making sure their lives stayed comfortable. No, back then, I was the good daughter. But now I was selfish, ungrateful, difficult. Another text came in. Megan, this time. The bank says my car payment didn't go through. WTF, Louise? I almost laughed. Megan, who had never worked a full-time job in her life. Megan, who always had dad or me to pick up the pieces whenever she got overwhelmed with responsibilities. Not this time. A few hours later, I received a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was soft, careful, the same tone she had always used when she wanted to guilt me into compliance. Sweetheart, your father is very upset. The tax bill is overdue and the penalties are adding up. He says the house could be at risk. You know how much that place means to us, how much it means to you and Megan. I just don't understand why you're doing this. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, counted to 3 before hitting delete. She didn't understand. She didn't understand why I was finally saying no, why I was done sacrificing my future while they built Megan's on my back. The truth was, she understood perfectly. She just didn't like it. By evening, my inbox had a new email. Subject, final notice, property tax payment past due. I skimmed through it, unimpressed. Not my problem anymore. I had spent over $118,000 in them. $118,000. More than enough for a down payment on my own home, an investment in my own future. And they had never once acknowledged it. Never once thanked me. My phone buzzed again. Another call from my father. I let it ring. Then, with a calmness that surprised even me, I opened my investment account and transferred $120 into a newly created portfolio. Label, my future. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't some dramatic act of defiance. It was a correction, a recalibration, a long overdue course change. My final act for the night was simple. I drafted a single text, my thumb hovering over the send button. I am no longer funding any expenses related to the vacation home, Megan's car, or any other family financial obligation. Moving forward, you will need to handle these costs yourselves. I sent it. And then, for the first time in years, I turned off my phone. The silence was liberating. The silence didn't last long. By the next morning, my phone was vibrating off the nightstand, a relentless stream of missed calls and messages lighting up the screen. Dad, Mom, Megan. Over and over again. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. Still, curiosity won out. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the messages. Dad, this is unacceptable, Louise. You are acting like a child. Call me back now. Mom, sweetheart, please, just talk to us. You don't understand what you're doing. Your father is devastated. Megan, what the hell lies? My car payment bounced. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Fix this. I stared at the last message for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. Megan wasn't asking why I had stopped. She wasn't apologizing. She was just demanding I resume my role as her personal ATM, as if my existence was predicated on making sure she never faced a single inconvenience. I set my phone down and went about my morning. For the first time in years, I felt no obligation to fix anything for them. No anxiety, no guilt. That lasted until the knocking started. A loud, insistent pounding at my apartment door. I froze, my heart stuttering. Then came my father's voice. Louise, open this door right now. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. Of course he had come. Of course he couldn't just accept that I had drawn a line. He'd always been the type to get what he wanted through sheer force of will. But this time, it wouldn't work. I walked to the door but didn't open it. Instead, I spoke through the wood, my voice steady. Go home, Dad. Silence. Then a scoff. Go home? We need to talk about this in person. This ridiculous tantrum of yours has gone far enough. I'm not paying the property taxes. I'm not paying Megan's car note. I'm not paying for anything else. There's nothing to discuss. His voice darkened. You think you're punishing us? You think this is some kind of power move? Well, let me tell you something, young lady. Family takes care of family. That's what we do. That's what you've always done, and that's what you will continue to do. I laughed, a short, sharp sound. Family takes care of family? Really? Because I've spent years taking care of you, and I can't seem to recall a single time you took care of me. Another silence. This one stretched longer, heavier. I could hear his breathing through the door, sharp and uneven. Louise, his voice was quieter now, lower, coaxing. We gave you everything. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. Is it really so wrong to expect a little help now? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. A little help? Dad, I have given you over $100,000 in the last 5 years, and all while you funneled money into a trust fund for Megan. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly inclined to keep this arrangement going. That was when I heard my mother's voice. She must have been standing behind him, waiting. Sweetheart, she said softly, pleading, please, just come outside. Let's talk. A familiar ache bloomed in my chest. My mother had always been the peacekeeper, the quiet enabler. She had never raised her voice, never argued. She had simply let it happen, let them use me. And the worst part? I think she had convinced herself it was love. I pressed my forehead against the door. I am done talking, Mom. I'm done being taken advantage of. And I'm done pretending like this is normal. Another beat of silence. Then my father's voice, filled with barely restrained rage. You will regret this, Louise. A threat. No, not a threat. A promise. I exhaled, stepping back from the door. Then, so be it. Footsteps. A slammed door. A car peeling out of the parking lot. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wood grain of my apartment door, feeling the finality of what I had just done settle deep in my bones. The texts and calls continued through the day, but I ignored them. Let them stew. Let them finally realize that their safety net had been cut away, that their golden goose had flown the coop. That evening, my cousin Thomas called. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. Hey, Louise, he said, voice cautious. Just giving you a heads up. There's a family meeting happening at your parents' house this weekend. I rolled my eyes. Let me guess. The official agenda is how to shame Louise into paying for everything again. He let out a humorless laugh. Pretty much. Uncle Pete and Aunt Catherine are coming. Dad, too. Your father is spinning this like you're betraying the family. I leaned against the counter, pressing my fingers into my temples. Of course he is. There was a pause. Then, Thomas said something that made me still completely. I overheard him talking to Uncle Pete. They're planning to guilt you into covering all the late fees and penalties. They're framing it as you deliberately putting the house at risk. I exhaled through my nose. Are you going? Yes, he said, then hesitated. And so should you. My chest tightened. Why? Because this time, you need to say it in front of everyone, he said simply. You need to let them all see the truth. And I'll back you up. A slow, cold determination settled over me. Fine, I said, my voice steady. I'll be there. The tension was thick as I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house. The same house I had once considered home, now just another battlefield. Cars lined the street. Uncle Pete's truck, Aunt Catherine's sedan, Thomas's SUV. They had all come. Not for me, not to support me, but to witness what my father undoubtedly framed as my betrayal. I took a steadying breath before stepping out. I had no illusions about how this meeting would go. They weren't here to listen. They were here to fix me, to break me back into the obedient daughter they could control. But that wasn't going to happen. Inside, the living room was already packed. My father stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed, jaw set in barely contained fury. My mother perched on the couch, wringing her hands. Megan sat beside her, arms folded, her face a perfect mask of wounded entitlement. The rest of the family filled in the space, some looking concerned, others unreadable. You actually showed up, my father said, voice tight. Of course, I replied, my tone calm. Wouldn't want to miss the show. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he turned to the room, gesturing dramatically. Everyone, I think we all know why we're here. Louise has made it clear she no longer cares about this family. She's cut us off, abandoned her responsibilities, and now we're left scrambling to fix the mess she's made. A murmur rippled through the group. I caught a few skeptical glances, Thomas, Uncle Pete. But the rest? They were eating it up. Let's be clear about something, I said, stepping forward. I haven't made a mess. I've simply stopped cleaning up yours. A sharp gasp from my mother. Megan scoffed. My father's expression darkened. You ungrateful. No. I cut him off, my voice like steel. You don't get to do that. You don't get to make this about me being selfish when I've spent the last 5 years covering your expenses while you funneled money into Megan's trust fund. Silence. Uncle Pete frowned. Trust fund? I turned to him, my hands steady as I pulled out the documents I had printed and passed them around. Yes. While I was working 2 jobs in college, while I was scraping by to afford rent, while I was paying for this family's vacations, property taxes, Megan's car payments, Dad was putting money aside for her. $350,000. Aunt Catherine's head snapped toward my parents. Is this true? My father shifted, his confidence faltering. That's private family business. No, I said, my voice unwavering. It's my business when I've contributed nearly $120,000 to this family while being told there wasn't enough for me. The murmurs grew louder. I could see it happening, the doubt creeping in, the carefully constructed narrative. My father had spun, starting to unravel. You always had more than Megan, my mother said suddenly, her voice trembling. You were smarter, more capable. You didn't need help, and that justifies using me? My laugh was bitter. You made me believe we were all struggling together, but you weren't struggling, you were prioritizing her. You just expected me to pick up the slack. Megan, who had been silent until now, finally snapped. Oh, get over yourself, Louise. It's not like you're broke. You're just throwing a tantrum because things didn't go your way for once. I turned to her, eyes cold. I'm not broke because I worked for everything I have. Because while you were being handed every advantage, I was out there making sure I could stand on my own. And the second I stopped letting you all take advantage of me, suddenly, I'm the villain? Her mouth opened, then shut. She had no response to that. My father, however, wasn't done. You think you're punishing us? He said, voice low, dangerous. You think you can just walk away? No, I said. I know I can. I turned to the family, my heart pounding but my voice steady. This isn't about money. It's about control. And I am done being controlled. You want the property taxes paid? Sell the vacation house. You want Megan's car covered? She can figure it out like the rest of us did. I am not your safety net anymore. A long silence. The weight of my words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Then, finally, Uncle Pete spoke. She's right. My father's head snapped toward him. What? Uncle Pete exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You always talked about fairness, Greg. But this isn't fair. You let one daughter drain herself while the other got a free ride. That's not family, that's favoritism. The room shifted. Doubt turned to realization. My mother's face was pale. Megan looked stunned. And my father? For the first time in my life, he looked afraid. Afraid. Because he was losing. Because the truth was out. Because I wasn't coming back. I grabbed my bag, turned on my heel, and walked toward the door. Louise, my mother called, voice pleading. I didn't stop. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, crisp and freeing. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Proud of you. I smiled, stepping off the porch. For the first time in years, I was truly, finally, free. The fallout was immediate. I had barely made it back to my apartment before the messages started flooding in. Most were from my father, alternating between demands and veiled threats. My mother's were softer, laced with quiet pleading, as if she thought I could still be reasoned with. Megan, however, was silent. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. Days passed. Then a week. The house of cards my father had so carefully built was crumbling, and I knew he was scrambling, trying to piece it back together. He must have gone to everyone, their friends, extended family, spinning some version of events where I was the villain, the cold-hearted daughter who had abandoned them. But something was different this time. No one was rushing to save him. Instead, I received messages from relatives I barely spoke to. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Louise. And then, a message from Thomas. Megan wants to talk to you. I hesitated. A week ago, Megan had sat in that living room, defending herself, defending them. She had called me selfish. She had looked at me like I was a stranger, someone she didn't recognize. And now she wanted to talk? I ignored it. But the next day, she showed up at my door. I stared at her through the peephole, debating whether to pretend I wasn't home. But Megan had always been persistent. If I didn't open the door, she'd just keep knocking, keep pushing, until I caved. So, with a steadying breath, I unlocked it. Megan stood there, arms wrapped around herself, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her normally flawless hair was pulled into a loose bun, and for the first time in forever, she looked lost. "Hey," she said, voice uncertain. I crossed my arms. "What do you want, Megan?" She exhaled sharply, shifting on her feet. "Can I come in?" I considered slamming the door in her face, but something about the way she said it, not demanding, not entitled, but almost hesitant, made me step aside. She entered slowly, looking around like she had never been in my apartment before. And, I realized, she hadn't. In all the years I had lived here, she had never visited. I gestured toward the couch. "Say what you came to say." She sat down, rubbing her hands together before looking up at me. I was wrong. I blinked. Of all the things I expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. I was wrong about everything. About you. About how Dad has treated us. About how I let myself believe I deserved all of it. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. I looked at the financial records. "Everything you paid for. I knew you helped, but I didn't know it was that much. And when Dad tried to spin it, when he told me you were just overreacting, She shook her head. I couldn't believe him anymore. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my face unreadable. "Why now?" Megan let out a humorless laugh. "Because when you stopped paying for everything, I realized I had nothing. Dad didn't step in. He didn't offer to pay my car loan, or the extra bills, or any of the things he said he always took care of. He just told me to figure it out." I exhaled through my nose. "Welcome to my world." She flinched but nodded. "Yeah, I see that now. And I get it if you don't forgive me." "I wouldn't either." She hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket and set it on the table between us. "But I wanted to make things right." I stared at the paper but didn't pick it up. "What is it?" "A signed legal transfer," she said quietly. "I used money from my trust fund to pay the property taxes, and I convinced Dad to put you on the deed. You own 25% of the lake house now." My breath caught in my throat. Of all the outcomes I had imagined, this wasn't one of them. Megan looked down at her lap. "I know it's not enough. It doesn't undo anything, but it's a start." I reached for the paper, my fingers brushing against it lightly. It was real. She had actually done this. For the first time in weeks, the anger inside me loosened, just a fraction. I studied my sister, the girl who had always been given everything, who had never once had to struggle, and for the first time, I saw someone who understood what it felt like to be left behind. I sighed, shaking my head. "You have a lot to make up for, Megan." She gave a small, sad smile. "I know, but maybe now I can start."